And good morning. Welcome to this edition of the Kitchings Table, the last day of February, last day of Black History Month. Wrap all those together, and what do you get? You get the Kitchings Table. That's right. That's what you get on a Tuesday morning here at 10 a.m. here on Awesome Radio, 106.9 FM, WBIS, Awesome Radio. You can also check us out on YouTube, GPAC23, Roku, and of course, Facebook Live. But we're here today to bring you some more interesting information from Black History Month, and we're going to close out the month, we believe, on something that's very, very outstanding and positive. Joining me this morning, as always, is my co-partner and host, Ronline Cannady. Good morning, Ronline.
Good morning. Good morning.
So this month we are closing out February. You know, we're 3 days short. I think they owe us 3 days. We should get those 3 days back some kind of way, simply because every year is 3 days short, sometimes 4 days short, and we never can recapture those days. So we miss 4 days of information or celebration, whichever serves you best, because February is the shortest month of the year. And I've always wondered, how did they come up with February being the shortest month? Just 28 days, but that's a conversation for another day.
Absolutely.
So this morning, we're going to close out the month of February in Black History Month, talking about, and we're still keeping our theme surrounding this month about literacy, the ability to read and the ability to write. And the one thing about literacy is that you must be able to read with comprehension, because just reading the words means nothing. So we're going to close out the month with literacy. And what better way to do that than to talk about 4 Black publications that made their marks starting in the 1950s. A gentleman had a vision in 1951 and took that vision all the way through 2000. And that gentleman was John H. Johnson. So we're going to be talking about Ebony Magazine, Jet Magazine, Essence Magazine, and Black Enterprise this morning, because those 3 individuals, who started those particular publications set the tone and set the standard for what we should expect from Black publications as it relates on a monthly basis, and as it gives us an insight and an open window to how Black America looks and views at things. So we're going to start out talking about those 2 products that Mr. John H. Johnson started up in Chicago, Illinois. And Ronline, I before I got started with the magazine Ebony, I had to look up, what does the word ebony mean? And when I looked it up, it said a heavy blackish or very dark brown timber from a mainly tropical tree. Not any particular tree, but a tropical tree, but it's blackish. Interesting blackish, being that we now have a TV show called Blackish. Blackish or very dark brown timber. So that's what ebony means. And ironically, Mr. Johnson decided to name his magazine Ebony. Your thoughts?
I love the concept. When I remember being in my mother's beauty shop, salon, they call it today. And all of these magazines were there. And my favorite one was Ebony. That was one of my first words that I remembered, making sure that I spelled correctly. And it had a significance to me. It didn't register to me of why until later in life, wherein you start your identity, wanting to know who you are, where you come from, and what everything means. And that word just followed me, and it made me wonder, like, okay, well, why, my skin complexion, wishing that I was more darker than what I am. So that knowing the concept behind that and the thought that must have went into that, and incidentally, when Blackish came out, that was the first word I thought about, not really linking the two. So I must have read the definition, at some point to be able to link those two together. So I thank you for bringing that out.
Well, because of the iconic and the historical value of Ebony magazine, what it was, what it did, the impact it had on the life of Black Americans, I guess it was appropriate. Uh, the magazine was named by the wife of Mr. Johnson, and Eunice Walker Johnson was a very, very, very integral part of Ebony magazine and all the Ebony things that uh, happened from their publishing business. They formulated this magazine after Life magazine, which was a very well put together magazine that highlighted the life of America, of course, minus the life of Black Americans. But they wanted to bring about a publication, something that would tell the stories, give you the information about Black Americans, um, and what they were doing at the time. Now, when it initially started, Ebony focused on Black athletes, Black entertainment figures. Uh, the first issue of Ebony came out on November 1st, 1945. They printed 25,000 copies, and they say they sold out. Just sold out. It's just gone. There was nothing. And can you imagine selling a product your first time out, and they come back and tell you, we don't have any more. We're sold out. It's all gone. You have to wait till next month, which then presents a dilemma for the Johnsons. If you started out with 25 this month, how many should you print next month? Should you double that? Should you triple it? Should you quadruple it? It's a good problem to have, as they say.
Yes.
So this is what happened. November 1st, 1945, Ebony magazine came out. And as the years passed and as this magazine gained momentum and started to get more people to see what was going on, and when you think about 1945 from a sports perspective, there weren't many Black athletes who were in the limelight, so to speak. Yes, of course, Jackie Robinson had broken the color barrier, and baseball was starting to see some more Black players to come on the scene. Basketball did not have that many players. Football did not have that many players. I think the one sport that probably gathered more attention at that time might have been boxing. Of course, Joe Louis was the heavyweight champion of the world at that time. But on the other side, when we talk about the entertainers, the people who were entertaining on Broadway, who were entertaining in clubs, not so much in film, the singers, their style of life and their, I guess, the things that were making their lives what they were, because they went to another level economically during that time. So they brought out the stories, but I think the most important thing that Ebony did, like Life, was the photographs. I think we got enamored with the pictures, to see us, to see people of color on a page in a magazine in full color, to see this, to be able to hold it, to show it to some people. Like you said, in beauty salons, probably in barbershops, those magazines were there. And I can recall going to the barbershop sometimes and picking up an old edition of a magazine, whether it was Ebony or Jet, even as I got older and started looking at Sports Illustrated. But Ebony and Jet magazines would be on the tables or be in those news magazine racks, 6, 7, 8. A year later, you look at a magazine, it's like, oh man, this happened a year ago. This happened 6 months ago. But they just had the value. That value stayed. It did not lose its value, whether it was 1 month old a 1-year-old, it kept its value. I
I
see
de-
you laughing about that.
yes, I definitely agree. So I grew up in Chicago, down in Chicago, and going downtown with my mother to pay bills. Those street newsstands were
Hmm.
there, and my mother would stop and look at the different magazines and things like that. And the first one was Ebony and Jet that she would look at. And then something significant happened. It was you saw more and more, as you say, people on the cover. And then you hear about these awards and the ceremonies that went along with it. And, it just really became a big thing, of the big talk in the salons. So I know exactly what you're talking about. And then to look at hair, my mother was a cosmetologist. So to look at hair, and I remember my hair was very, very long at the time. And I didn't know the difference between adult hair and, adult styles and children's styles. All I know is I wanted her to do my hair the way I've seen some of the stars and people who were being discovered. And I really didn't know much about that time. I knew Martin Luther King had died. I knew they were talking about this man called Malcolm X when I was younger and things like that. But as I got older and I started thinking about my earliest memories of being in that salon with my mother while people were coming in to get their hair taken care of, and the conversations. I remembered how some of the singers would show up, the groups and things like that. And then to see some of those people on the covers of magazines that I had recognized, So all of that, as you say, it shaped me, is significant. And I didn't realize how it shaped me until we started doing the research on this. So um, thank you. We were talking about literacy and had no idea that literacy will lead to something like this. And I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be speaking on it.
Well, those experiences last with us for a lifetime. And being that you were in the hometown of Ebony and Jet magazine, I'm sure that publication or those publications had significant impact, not just on the magazine industry itself, but on the lifestyles and culture of Black Americans in Chicago and throughout the United States. But I'm sure it raised the bar for Black Chicagoans to another level during that time, simply because it was their hometown magazine. It was coming out of Chicago. It wasn't coming out of New York. And of course, everybody says that New York is the epicenter of the world. But now, this gentleman, Mr. John H. Johnson, who was a guy who started a publication business, a publishing business. And you got to think about this. The newspaper is one thing, and the newspaper is weekly, which is a little bit more challenging when you talk about getting things and getting information out. But we're talking about a monthly publication where you got to spend probably 15 days getting information, photographs, and then doing the layouts and the printing and the distribution. So the fact that this magazine started in 1945, it grew from Mr. Johnson wanting to have this publishing business. He started something called the Negro Digest. And because that publication had some problems, he teamed up with a man by the name of Joseph Levy, who was a magazine distributor. And between the two of them, they got the bugs worked out. And within 6 months, they had reached 50,000 publications, magazines sold. But here's the interesting thing in addition to that, that that magazine, that magazine started advertisers, to create customized ads which featured Black American models using their products. And as far as hair products go, and we can thank Madam Walker for this because she definitely was the person that started this business for Black Americans. But aside from the hair products, the other products that American business started seeing Black American use, they had to be very careful about what they did, because seeing non-Black people in ads and you selling me a product and I don't see me in it, I might be a little slow to purchase it.
Mhm.
But when Ebony Magazine almost forced these businesses to put people in their print ads, not we hadn't even gotten to the TV part. TV was not strong as you see it today, but to put Black people in these print ads, meaning you got to go find Black models to take these pictures using their products, and then those ads get laid out and put in his magazine in order to sell. That, I would say, was one of the game-changing things that John H. Johnson did with a publication, because it says here that by the 40th anniversary of Ebony Magazine, which would have been what, 1985, they had a circulation of 1.7 million magazines. 1.7 from 25,000 when it first started. 40 years later, it had reached 1.7 million. But in addition, it caused a change in the business of advertisers selling products to Black Americans. And I think that was very significant during a time where we're talking about segregation moving to integration. And I think one of the businesses that I truly believe, and they were based out of Chicago too, that helped make some of that happen was the McDonald's Corporation.
Mm.
I truly believe that. What do you think?
I believe you're right on the money. When you started talking about advertising, it made me think about um, my mother had a friend who also had a beauty salon in downtown Chicago. And I remembered some advertisers coming in asking could they put some billboards up around her shop. And I remember she negotiated, like, okay, is this going to have a back and front panel? And she said, my shop is always going to be advertised on one side of the panel, and you can use that to sell it to whomever on the other side. And next thing I know, there was a billboard craze. And a lot of those billboards that I saw the advertising for ended up in those magazines. So, like I said, this keeps sparking memory after memory of, how things really was started, the importance of it, and where we are today with the digital advertising, um, sponsorships, and it just goes on from there to keep these businesses operating. So for Ebony to be operating from 1945 with all of the challenges that they had coming through, I'm sure funding was a problem, and trying to get capital, and as you say, to keep increasing the demand for making sure that these magazines ended up in the hands of those who wanted it.
Well, the beauty of it is that it did become a success. It did not hit a wall. It did not find itself in business today and out of business tomorrow. To hear that your mother was a shrewd negotiator with her business from the standpoint of saying, if you want to advertise here, fine, but I'm going to have half the space. You can have the other half. And if you want to divide your half up into a half of a half of a half, if you want to go that far, that's up to you. But you're not going to have the whole billboard. So again, Chicago during a time of progress, if you will, in the late 40s and early 50s, then through the 60s, 70s, people became astute business people, I believe, probably in Chicago more so than some other cities across the country. And this gave people not only some economic power and freedom, but it gave them self confidence and having more respect and enjoying the fact that now we can be a part of this economic pie that America has kept us from for so long. So, again, this magazine did more for people in the community than we want to maybe give it credit for. It wasn't just a social magazine featuring entertainers and athletes. But think about this. Now I've got this successful magazine slowly growing, and people like to read and see the pictures of Black people in the entertainment field and the sports field. But 6 years after he released, almost to the day, Ebony magazine, this man saw another need and decided to work on day to day, week to week news stories in the Black community. So he started the next publication called Jet Magazine. Jet Magazine. And some like nicknames, you wonder how people come across nicknames and what led to them having a nickname. So he named the magazine Jet because he wanted to symbolize black and speed. Think about that. And from an athletic perspective, in football, baseball, basketball, one of the monikers is speed kills. You got speed, you're going to beat somebody. That's what it really means. So he symbolized black and speed. And here's a quote from his first issue that Mr. Johnson wrote: "In the world today, everything is moving along at a faster clip. There's more news and far less time to read it. Jet's goal was to provide news coverage on happenings among Negroes, as we were called then, all over the United States, in entertainment." Here is his topics that he wanted to bring to the forefront: entertainment, politics, sports, and social events, as well as unusual personality, places, and events. The late comedian Red Fox said that Jet Magazine was the Negro Bible. That's what Red Fox said. So on November 1st, 1951, Mr. Johnson printed the first edition of Jet Magazine. And one of the things that I maybe helped launch it forward was the fact that he covered the story of Emmett Till and the images of Emmett Till. And in 1955, that particular murder of that young man got great coverage from Jet Magazine, even though the photographs and images were shocking and graphic. But it helped to give Jet Magazine a lot of footage and foundation. And it moved that magazine, I would say, launched it forward at the speed he spoke about when he talked about a jet. So here again, an innovator, a visionary, a man who had his finger on the pulse at that time of what was going on in the Black community, Ronline.
Yes, what a visionary. That's what all I can say about that. I remember looking at some of those publications from the early days, and I was so thankful that I learned how to read. And as you say, learned how to comprehend. My reading and comprehension, I found out in my later years, wasn't that, wasn't standard. It was below average, as a matter of fact. But I'm thankful for the stories that I was able to read to know that we had work to do. I knew that as a child that we had work to do. I remember the things that I was going through at the time, and I think that was my earliest days of understanding that suppression was coming along with that. People did not want you to have those magazines in your hand. I went to a predominantly a white school, and a lot of Hispanics and Latinos was showing up along with African Americans at the school. So they decided to raise tuition, to keep many of us out. But again, no one really wanted you to really know about your culture or where you came from. And I'm so thankful that people kept pushing for us to know about our culture, to know that, um, to start identifying with those stories from the magazines. Remember, current events came up, and they would have you to go, want you to, consult your newspaper or whatever. But in the shops, that we frequent, between my mother and her friends, I was there with the magazines to occupy myself or whatever, and learning how to do my current events and bringing those stories into the classroom.
Well, there's nothing like having the information you need when you talk about having the information you need to do your schoolwork. I think about the show we did about encyclopedias.
Mhm.
So, again, here's a publication that's bringing a lot of different things to a community, and not long stories. Sometimes they did stories that carry 2 or more pages, but most of the time the stories that you saw in Jet were very concise, very brief. And aside from the other things that uh, he started the magazine's topics on, it also started to include fashion and beauty tips, dating advice, health tips, diet tips, so on and so forth. Now, if I ask the question, what was the most prominent feature in Jet magazine that half of their readers probably wanted to see before they read the rest of the magazine? I'm trying to frame that without sounding biased or chauvinistic, but in a way it is.
I
What
believe
what was that one feature?
I believe sports, really.
Oh no,
It
oh
wasn't
no,
sports.
it wasn't sports.
Okay, well, I knew the women were looking for whoever the next iconic person was in sports. I knew that. That was the number one talk in the beauty salon. So I can't go past anything else
Oh,
besides the next actress.
when I give it to you, you're gonna be like, oh yeah, that one page in the middle of the magazine of Jet
Oh, that
magazine,
middle
that one
spread.
page,
Okay.
beauty of the week,
Week, yes.
beauty of the week, and
And
it would
that's
be
where a lot of those hairstyles, you're absolutely right.
the
How that person was wearing her hair. Yes.
see, the women were looking at the hair, the men were looking at what was in that swimsuit.
Understood.
So that feature, and I don't know who caused him to put that particular feature, gave him that idea, but it definitely helped probably sell a few more magazines because that particular page at the time featured uh, famous black women or entertainers. It started to then, as the magazine got older, maybe featured young women who were in college and who were doing things of their hobbies and what they like and their interests and their profession, where they lived. So again, just enough to whet your appetite, and that was one of the things that made Jet magazine stand out amongst all the other magazines. But Ronline, I got a nugget for you that maybe you know and maybe you don't know. I know many people who are listening and watching don't know this, but Did you know that here in Jacksonville, Florida, there was a magazine that was emulating Jet magazine, just for Jacksonville though, but it was emulating Jet magazine back in the late 70s. Did you know
No,
that?
I did not know that.
Okay. Well, I'm going to share this little nugget before we get to our halftime break and move on to our next two magazines. But in 1977, a black female by the name of Gladys Hill Maynor started her own publication, same size magazine, same format. It was for the local, it was for the local community, but it basically served in the same format. And the magazine was called Like It Is.
Mm.
Like it is, and that used to be a thing we used to say back in the day. Tell it like it is.
Tell it like it is.
Tell it like it is, which means tell the truth. Give us the facts, nothing but the facts and only the facts. And she started this magazine for the Jacksonville Black community. And I know this simply because for a couple of months, I worked with her on the magazine. I was a photographer and the layout artist. And for two editions that I worked on, my photographs were featured on the cover. But I also got a chance, Ronline, to shoot that beauty of the week.
Yes, yes, yes. Okay.
I got a chance to shoot the beauty of the week. And the very first publication that I was working on, the beauty of the week was not one, but four young ladies, ironically, who were featured on that page. And just to show you what kind of mover and game changer Miss Hill Maynor was, we took the pictures on somebody's sailing boat. And those four young ladies had on their swimsuits, and I took the pictures, and it turned out well. And I was a happy guy.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw the enormous upside to this publication, but the downside was that the community was not ready for it. It did not move in circulation, and it did not have the success that it should have had, based on the fact that here's someone doing something locally, and all it took was for people to support it and get those first 25,000 copies like he did when he first started his. If that could have happened, maybe the magazine would have lasted a little bit longer than a year, but that did happen. I still have the two copies that I worked on in my possession. I will always treasure them because I was just out of college when that happened.
Wow.
Just out of college. So my eyes were wide open, and I'm looking at this opportunity. Hey, this is the Kitchings Table here on Awesome Radio, WBISLP, 106.9 FM, Roku, GPAC 23, Facebook, and YouTube are where you can find us. I'm Earl Kitchings. Joining me is Ronline Cannady. Our subject today are the four Black publications, iconic publications that reached the threshold that we have yet to see since then. So we're going to move on to our next two magazines. We've already talked about the iconic John H. Johnson creating Ebony Magazine and Jet Magazine, but Ronline is going to take us from here to our next two magazines. Ronline, who are we going to talk about now?
We're going to talk about Essence Magazine and the Black Enterprise Magazine. So, just like what you were talking about, the iconics, the Essence Magazine, which was founded in 1968 by Clarence O. Smith, Cecil Hollingsworth, Jonathan Blunt, Denise M. Clark, and Edward Lewis. The original name in concept was Sapphire. And everybody knows when you have a sapphire in your possession, oh, that's going to be a big thing. That's going to draw the attention that you desire. And I do believe what happened in Essence to be geared around women, the things that they were going through um, during that era, And where we are today has given us spirit, has given us um, the idea that we are important and that we should be able to capitalize on our importance in our lives. So I'm thankful for this magazine. And the photographer, let's let's talk about Parks. He served as the first editorial director, and Susan L. Taylor started her career with the magazine as a freelance fashion and beauty editor before becoming editor in chief in 1981. Um, and her positions that she held until 2000. And the first publication was released in May 1970. So they were founded in 68, but it took them until 1970 to get that first publication out. And it says the magazine had a difficult start of obtaining funding. Um, and then, of course, the three editors in chief, they left within the first year. So in 1971, Marcia Ann Gillespie was hired as editor in chief, and her vision helped to stabilize the company. And then the monthly publication started with a production approximately 50,000 copies per month and quickly grew to over a million. So, with that happening, that kind of growth happening during that time, do you remember the Essence magazine when it first came to the newsstands?
I can't say that I remember Essence when it first came to the newsstand. I tell you what, when I really remember Essence magazine, and it would have been my second year in college, um, and having, uh, um, female classmates and female girlfriend, uh, they were very into Essence magazine during that time. So I would say somewhere between 72 and 73, uh, I recognized that this magazine was having impact, because if you're not only reaching the adult women, but now you're reaching the young adult women who are in college, who are really paying a lot of attention, because the fashion styles and the hairstyles that were being put in Essence showed up on the women on these college campuses. And you just recognize that. And once again, that magazine, I'm sure, was very prominent in hair salons.
Yes, it was. It was. And then it says, and by the time 1975 came around, that's when they began to making a profit. And so when I think about what makes this world go around, as far as when it comes to commerce, is money. And I wasn't I want to thank my sister, Gigi, for this. I remember receiving my first tickets to go to the Essence Music Festival. I
Mm-hmm.
had no
Mm-hmm.
idea what that was. And to see all of these celebrities, the women dressed in their gowns, and as you say, the fashion, the hairstyles, and they started talking about health, the health of women. A lot of studies were being done, and these things came out um, during those talks, making
Mm-hmm.
you pay attention
Mm-hmm.
of, yes, you have to make sure that you're taking care of your body, so that you can keep being beautiful, not on that just the outside, but also on the inside, and be able to live a long time, to have longevity into your life. So those things became important to me as well. And when I in doing this segment, it just lit another fire. I mean, week after week, during this Black History segments that we've been doing, it has just given me just a new um, a reason to live past, past my potential, to be able to live past my potential. And whatever my potential is, I realize there isn't anything that I can't do that I don't set my mind to. So these iconic women that has come, as pioneers through the ranks and the suffering that they have done in order for us to have the realization that we need to do more. We need to, it's so much more to do. And uh, stopping is not a, it's not an option.
Okay, well, no, stopping is not an option. And I think, again, Essence Magazine emulated probably one or two white publications in its layout. But again, Essence did what those magazines couldn't do. They could not get into the communities and the abilities to talk to Black women at the levels that Essence did and reach them and communicate and bring about information that Essence did. I mean, Essence was probably the closest thing to as Red Fox said, a Bible for women, for Black women that you could have, because it did provide a lot of great content, a lot of great stories, a lot of great images, information, not just fashion and beauty and health, but also economic and business information. It provided stories for motivating uh, women to become business owners and business leaders. So Essence did a lot.
Yeah.
And thankfully, the men who, and it's ironic, the men who founded this publication had a vision. And yet, I think for oftentimes in the 70s, whenever she became the editor, I think a lot of people thought that Susan Taylor was the person that was the owner or the founder of Essence, when she really wasn't. She was just that person that became the face of Essence magazine based on her, not only her style and look, but probably her persona. And I think that imagery of her having no hair, her hair braided like she did, that was, you saw her, you saw that, you saw Susan Taylor, and that was her trademark, I guess, for the most part. But this magazine definitely spoke volumes about Black womanhood and what it could do to make a change. And thankfully, the late Whitney Houston and the former First Lady Michelle Obama had an opportunity to appear on Essence before Essence really, was no longer with us.
Mhm. Yes, and you're right about that. I think when I think of Essence, I think about the many writers, the many poets, the spoken word. I believe came through that publication as well. We began to learn just the many things that we're talking about literacy today that really helped um, empower your voice, to empower your thoughts, to let you know that your thoughts are important. So you're absolutely right. And the think about how Whitney Houston impacted the music industry, and to think about how Michelle Obama impacted the world as being the first African American lady um, here in the United States of America, and to take that position, if you will, to a whole nother level of grace. And that's
Mm.
what I look at. The Essence magazine was, it was just a whole another iconic level of grace.
All right. So now, before we close out, let's talk about that last publication that did what those magazines gave you snippets of or partials of, and that was Black Enterprise.
Yes. Now, Black Enterprise. It was the founder of Black Enterprise was Earl Gilbert Graves Sr. And this was founded in 1969. The first publication came about in 19 in the 1970s. It says in 1973, Black Enterprise was published its first annual list of the largest African American owned companies in the country, called BE's 100. So we have the Fortune 100, we have the Fortune 500, but we have now BE's 100. And when I think about the concept of Black owned business owners, just being featured, it to be able to see someone that looks like you in business, having thriving businesses, and you want to be able to find out, well, what did they do? How did they stay in business? And to be able to read about how they received their start in business, and to be able to come through the ranks of all of the controversies, the challenges that would cause a business to go under, you got a chance to understand that you too could become successful.
Well, there's nothing like the power of an entrepreneur. There's nothing like the fact that a person that owns their own business, as they say, gets to call their own shots. You may work twice as hard, but you're working for yourself. It's a great feeling, and I know you know this, Ronline, working for self, knowing that in order to make that dollar cross the counter or hit the cash register, you've got to do so many things to do that. I learned my lessons in being an entrepreneur back in the right at the turn of the decade in the early 80s when I started a t-shirt business. And I only had one business class in college called Introduction to Business, and that doesn't really prepare you. But everything I learned about business, I learned, as they say, on the fly of running my own business. And when you run your own business, when you're that sole entrepreneur, you have to do everything. Everything. You may not be equipped to do everything, but if you're going to have a business and run it, you got to do everything. So seeing a magazine like Black Enterprise and having the BE 100s, not only that, but when they would feature businesses, they would give you the address and phone numbers, perhaps, so you might want to contact those businesses. It was a networking situation. It was a thriving situation where you wanted to find out more. They would also give you the calendar of events when Black organizations and fraternities and clubs would be having their annual conventions, so that maybe you might want to attend those. That was an opportunity if you were a business. And then, when you're grooming our children to understand the concepts of being your own boss and working your own business and things of that nature, this magazine, again, when we look at these four magazines, Ron Lee, let's just look at them and say they were all Bibles in their own way.
Yes.
Black Enterprise was the magazine for economics and business and finance for Black America during the times it was very vibrant. And I'm thankful that Earl Graves came along and had that vision and made that happen. So Black Enterprise, Essence, Jet, Ebony, those four magazines, whatever other magazines have come out of publication or in publication now for Black people, those four magazines, especially Ebony, are the building blocks or the foundation for all these new publishers. So we must be very thankful and grateful that we have had those people to do those things.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And it makes me think about when a young lady I used to work with, her name is Angel Peck. and she started her magazine called Into You here in Jacksonville, Florida. And I was one of the journalists. And my section was dealing with revealing you. And to do the interviews with people around town and to let to be able to get an inside vision of their life and the things that they wanted to start just really empowered me to be where I am today. So thank you so much for this segment with us today to be able to share with the world, Earl.
Well, thank you, Ronline, for being with me today. And as usual, we're out of time. But we hope that our segment today, speaking about the 4 iconic magazine publications for Black America, have inspired you, have opened you up to know some things. We're grateful and thankful for WBIS LP, Awesome Radio, allowing us to have this. So we're going to call it a day. We hope that you continue to have a good week. For Ronline, Cannady, I'm Earl Kitchings saying until next week here on the Kitchings Table, do something positive and good for someone else in your world. Have a great week, and we'll see you next Tuesday morning. Take care.